Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Ya Fatah, Ya Alim, iftah lana fathan qariba wa zidna ilma. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to this series where we go through Al-Muqaddimah al-Jazariyyah line by line. Last time we covered line 5, so make sure you go back and watch that if you haven't, plus all the previous ones. Today we'll cover the 6th line, inshallah. As always, let's start by reciting it. makhārij al-ḥurūf was-ṣifāt li-yalfiẓū bi-afṣaḥi al-lughāt, which translates to makhārij, articulation points, makhārij al-ḥurūf, articulation points of letters, was-ṣifāt, and their characteristics. li-yalfiẓū bi-afṣaḥi al-lughāt, to pronounce them in the most eloquent of languages. So now in this 6th line, Ibn al-Jazari begins outlining the actual subject matter of the poem. So after establishing the obligation and sequence in the previous verses, he now points to the foundations upon which the correct Quranic recitation rests. And this line is the first line of functions like a table of contents. Okay, so he's going to list out a bunch of different topics, and this is his first line. He signals the key topics that will be addressed, beginning with the most essential elements of sound itself, which are the articulation points of the letters, makhārij al-ḥurūf. So he begins with makhārij, and this order is intentional. Before any sound can exist, it must have a place of emergence. Okay, if the articulation point is incorrect, the letter itself is going to be compromised. So by placing makhārij first, he establishes that tajwīd begins not with the beautification and rules, but with accuracy first. And then was-ṣifāt, and the characteristics. Only after identifying where a letter comes from does he mention ṣifāt. So the qualities and characteristics that give each letter its personality. Okay, so hams and jahar, rakhawa and shidda, etc. So the makhārij tells us where a sound is produced from. A ṣifā tells us how that sound behaves. So together they form the fundamentals of sound production. And if either is lost, the sound is going to be altered, and with it, the recitation. Okay, so these two topics are not random at all. They are the minimum required to preserve a sound. So nowadays, we preserve sound through recordings. But in Ibn al-Jazari's time and before, the only way to preserve the Qur'an's recitation was to describe that sound with precision, where it emerges, how it behaves. And this is exactly what makhārij and ṣifāt do. And they are the science of preserving sounds without the machines that we have nowadays. Going on to the second hemistich, li-yalfiẓū bi-afṣaḥi al-lughāt, so that they may pronounce in the most eloquent of languages. Now, the purpose of studying makhārij and ṣifāt is now made clear: to pronounce the Qur'an in the most beautiful of languages. Okay, in the language of the Qur'an. And the majority of scholars, they understand the most eloquent of languages to mean Arabic. Okay, the language that Allah chose for his final revelation. However, there are a minority of scholars that went further and suggested that this phrase refers to specifically the dialect of the Quraysh. But however, this interpretation doesn't appear very strong, because the Quran itself is preserved in multiple dialectal features within the 7 ahruf, an authentic recitation. The authentic recitation, the qira'at, they reflect variation beyond a single tribal dialect. So, for example, differences in pronunciation and expression found across the qira'at demonstrate that the Quran was revealed in a broader linguistic reality than just one exclusive dialect. So the phrase is best understood as referring to Arabic in its revealed Quranic form, and not just a single tribal pronunciation. Something else that's worthy of note is the word li-yalfiẓū. So some manuscripts and narrations of the poem read li-yanṭiqū, li-yanṭiqū instead of li-yalfiẓū. Okay, so the prior means to speak. So li-yanṭiqū means to speak. Li-yalfiẓū, the latter, is to utter. Okay, but both are about pronunciation though. And Mullā ʿAlī al-Qārī mentions that in Ibn al-Jazarī's final recension, the wording appears as li-yanṭiqū. Okay, and the difference is subtle and doesn't really affect the meaning. If anything, it reinforces the intent that correct articulation is about controlled, intentional speech and not just a casual utterance. So with this line, Ibn al-Jazarī formally, he opens the science of tajwīd. He tells the student that preserving the Qur'an begins with preserving the sound, where it emerges from and how it behaves. So makhārij and ṣifāt, they're not technical distractions. They are the tools by which the Ummah safeguarded the recitation long before recording devices existed. And by mastering these foundations, the reciter doesn't merely recite Arabic, they strive to recite the Quran in the most eloquent form of the language Allah chose for His book. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خيرا السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته